One of the ways that I really like to illustrate some of the disconnect that occurs is the term assignment.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Justin Harris.
Got a great guest coming up. He's a returning guest, Mr. Josh Wallit. Josh is the principal consultant for Wallit Solutions, who provides short and long-term consulting services on compliance, valuation, education, review, on and on and on for appraisers, appraisal management companies, attorneys, educational providers, and regulators. With over 20 years of experience, Wallit's skill set includes appraisal, banking, regulations, policy, instruction, licensing, and enforcement. His core goal is to foster clients' efficiency, accuracy, compliance, and growth through appropriate methodology and technology, sound reasoning and communication skills, and proper insight. Josh is the Vice President of the National Association of Appraisers. He's an AQB qualified USPAP instructor, and by the way, I would say one of the best in the nation. He holds an SRA and AIRRS designation with the Appraisal Institute. He's a member of the National Association of Appraisers, holds a certified distance education instructor certificate. Boy, I could go on and on. Josh, welcome to the program, man.
Thanks very much. I appreciate being here.
You know, it's always fun when somebody comes with so many qualifications, and I get tongue tied. But man, we're just pleased to have you. Most of all, your biggest credential is a good friend of mine and a good friend of the program. You've been on before. I really appreciate you taking the time to come back, man.
I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So tell me what you've been up to. You've kind of shifted your focus the last little while. You used to be pretty active in the appraisal scene, boots on the ground, if you will, and now you're doing more consulting, more education. I love what you're doing. Kind of share with the audience, if you don't mind, kind of your focuses.
Yeah, my days look very different from each other. Monday I might be helping an AMC with their policies and procedures and then move on to training some of their staff. Tuesday I might be coaching appraisers, taking a look at their reports, making sure the level of detail is appropriate for those intended uses. Might be designing a class the next day. I might be doing some work for a state regulator on investigations or even on training for some of their staff. I work with technology companies, actually. So some of the problematic QC upload type wizards that you may run across when you're uploading your appraisal reports.
This is your fault.
No, I'm working at this point now to make them more streamlined, right? To make sure they're not giving these bad firings, right? And giving bad results and things like that. And mostly it's not appraiser facing, actually, the ones I work on. So I should say that most of them are inward facing to the lender or inward facing to the AMC, so that they actually have really good results to look at, and they have good metrics and real real warnings that are firing, instead of wasting time with useless type reviews. So.
Okay, good. No, I love this. We live in such a highly regulated world and so complicated. I love the fact that there's people like you making it simpler and more streamlined. Thank you for being there. Thank you.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, my goal is really to make my clients' work more efficient and more accurate, and use technology in any way we can. And so that's why I have such a wide variety of clients. I'm always keeping busy with them. And there's a lot of ways where we can put some solutions in place that just haven't been there in the past.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I know one of your focuses is the training of AMCs, lender types. Let's talk a little bit about training. What kind of training are you doing with? Let's just focus on, and I know this will include a big array of different clients, but we're just going to, for purposes today, just make it simple and call them AMCs. What kind of training are you doing with AMCs right now, Josh?
Well, right now, one of the big pieces of the training is what I sort of generically call compliance training. Okay. And it encompasses a variety of topics. It started as valuation independence training. Okay, just saying, look, AMCs need to be training their staff. We know this because states require it. There's actually regulations that say, hey, AMC, you need to train your staff. Yeah. And then there's other states that say, oh, and it's on these specific topics. And they actually have an outline of topics that they require. Others are more generic in saying they need training, but there's also the need for this training coming down from client agreements. So when AMCs contract with lenders, the lenders say, okay, if you're going to be working for us, you need to provide certain training to your staff. And that's where we get a regulation called UDAAP related to abusive practices. We have discrimination training, we have fair housing training, but really the valuation independence remains the core of the training. And this is talking about all of the various areas in an appraisal department or in an AMC that is affected. So we're talking even compensation to appraisers, but we're of course talking about revision requests, reconsiderations of value, mandatory reporting. And these AMCs and lenders, they are required in certain circumstances to send reports to states. And so we take a look at when are you required and when are you not required to do that, right? What situations must trigger it? But we take a look at even, on the appraiser side, of course, we have the work file. We have that record keeping rule. But on the AMC side, they also have a similar rule coming down from states. And it says basically, look, we need to be able to look at your records and you need to keep all of the records associated, all of the communication, all of the documents associated with each order. And so we take a look at that type of training and how are we logging our phone calls, right? How are we saving our documents? How are we saying, if you step away, well, I know what happened 2 months later, right? That type of issue. And of course we cover USPAP. We cover USPAP either in depth or at least enough so they can speak the language. Depending on the client, they have different needs. So we customize some of this training too.
Let's set the stage a little bit, because I know, some of the confusion out there in the world, not necessarily with appraisers, but in general, is that, in fact, I get this question a couple of times a year from maybe individuals when I'm inside doing an inspection. A homeowner might say, now you guys have to go through a third party, right? And they don't know the term AMC in particular, but even appraisers will sometimes say things on the boards and different things that say, now that lenders have to go through AMCs, ... and then fill in the blanks. Of course, we know that to not be true, but some of the in-house lenders, they still have to have this separation. So is this kind of this training for those kind of departments as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I finished the second session for a lender client where we took a look at those exact same topics. And the live version is really good. There's, of course, a recorded version too, but the live version is great because I can really address a lot of the scenarios they come to me with. But yeah, those lenders, especially, they have perhaps non-appraiser staff that they want to get trained. And so it's for those. And so I generically sometimes refer to these groups or these roles as the appraisal department or the appraisal management department, because it's not necessarily an AMC we're talking about. We could be talking about these departments at the direct engagement lenders as well.
Yeah. And obviously this training is much more complicated than this next question is going to make it sound. But this I can see part of this training being, now you can't send an engagement letter that says my opinion of value is XXX, right? I mean, is this part of the training to help them understand what their role is?
Right. That's a really good example, and we actually have an item that covers that. As silly as it might sound, right? It's one of the basics. You can't communicate that a predetermined value or a required value or a requested value or whatever you want to call it. And so we do go over those. I like to joke with the attendees that, we're going to go over a lot of prohibitions, and then we'll go over the very limited allowances of what you can do, right? Here's what you can or may do, and here's all the laundry list of what you can. And one of them, of course, is communicating or requiring in some way a predetermined value. So, and what's really great about the training is when I'm dealing with people who may not be appraisers at these companies, and many times they're not, we're looking at the valuation independent sections. That's really their point of view. Those are the regulations targeted at them and their company. And then we take a look at USPAP, which when that is pulled into regulations by the states, that's from the appraiser's standpoint. And you often find some of the same issues. So we have state rules that tell the AMC you cannot request or use a signature of an appraiser. But on the flip side, when we get to the USPAP section, we say, hey, appraiser, you can't just willy-nilly send your signature out, right? You need to have control over your signature. We have that right in USPAP. So and that's just a really simple illustration of looking at both sides of the same coin. And that's really what it is. And that's what I really try to bring people on board with understanding is we can all learn to speak this same language because we all really in the end should be wanting to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting when the regulations came down in 2010, HVCC, and eventually merging into Dodd-Frank. It seemed like in the beginning, and I don't see this as much anymore, and I guess that's to my question. I'm wondering if it's the training like the one that you're doing that's caused this to go in the right direction. But it seemed like we, up till about 2008, it was very common. Let's just face it, very common to have an engagement letter with an estimate of value on it. All of a sudden that went away, and then I go out and do an inspection, and the homeowner would say, well, my loan officer told me to tell you that we need such and such, right? So in other words, they try to get around the regulation by maybe going in a back door, but I don't see that much anymore. I
don't think it comes up quite as much, but we do address that actually, because we talk about, either influencing or attempting to influence. A lot of the time people think, well, it's okay because the appraiser didn't change their value and something, you know, inappropriate occurred though. Well, if something inappropriate occurred that violates those regulations, it doesn't matter whether the appraiser changed their value or took out a photo or added a comp or, you know, whatever the case is. The fact that they attempted to influence is a violation in and of itself. And then we also have the issue of directly or indirectly. So you can't cheat, right? How you're describing, you can't cheat and get around it by saying, hey, I'm gonna have someone else tell them, or I'm gonna do something over here that looks great, but it has what we'll call an unintended consequence, which really is intended. And so now we have something indirect. Those are all inappropriate. And so we go over that. And most of the time, it's not really a surprise. Most folks are trying to do a good job anyway. They just don't always have the tools. They just don't really always have the specific knowledge. And so this gives them sort of reassurances and reinforces and sort of shores up what they are most likely already heading towards. They just don't necessarily have all the specifics. And sometimes scenarios do come up that surprise them. So it's very rewarding when we can sort of correct them and steer them correctly.
Yeah, no, I love this. I love the idea of quote unquote steering them correctly. You know, I think there's training that needs to occur on both sides. I think appraisers sometimes get frustrated, Josh, and I think you know, having been in that world, you feel this this tension sometimes of things that might happen, that, you know, things might be said, and then this question, okay, was that an actual, you know, breaking of a regulation? Was that just kind of verging on the edge? Was there an ethics violation there? Was there a moral violation there? Was a legal violation there? And I love the fact that training is occurring. You know, a lot of times the interaction that we have, Josh, with these big companies, again, let's just for simplicity purposes, just lump them all into the same bucket of AMCs. We might get a call or an email from somebody who, let's just face it, let's just put it, you know, out there in very plain English. They're not appraisers. They've never been appraisers. Sometimes they ask things and you just go, really? Have you ever read USPAP? You know, and so my question, I guess, goes to this idea of training happens where? In other words, is this the low-level individual that's, I mean, I don't mean low-level as far as a personality goes. I mean, as far as the tier 1 level individual in an AMC, for example, it might just be the one communicating, might just be the one sending out the email that hasn't necessarily been fully trained in USPAP or appraisal law, that kind of thing. My question is this training for that type of individual? And what role does the appraiser play in correction, education, you know, helping others understand, hey, that's an interesting question. Yeah, let me teach you a little something about what I can and can't do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, it's for all levels, and all levels, let me sort of clarify this. I've had executive level employees at AMCs attend, and this is not twisting their arm. They say, I want to have the best understanding of how we need to be behaving, how we need to be handling ourselves, how we need to be sort of screening and translating requests that we might get from the lender and things before we communicate to the appraiser and so on. And then it's all the way down to the person who is assigning appraisals, out to contract appraisers, you know, reviewing, communicating, sending out revisions, making phone calls, even trying to, you know, add people to the panel, you know, panel management and things like that. So it's really for all level. What we talk about are key people or controlling people, who are those people named on their registrations at the state, but also other management people with any sort of decision-making ability. So all the way from there down is really who we cover. And I like your point about correction, sort of what level of correction and sort of teaching is required from one side to the other. And really, ideally, neither side should teach the other. I mean, ideally, both sides should know what they're doing. So you're bringing up
an issue the word should. I heard that.
Right. I mean, we'd hope that the appraisal department knows what they're doing. We'd hope that the appraiser knows what they're doing. But there are questions that come up from these during these training sessions where they say, well, Josh, you're telling me not to instruct the appraiser. And I very clearly tell them, you are not to instruct the appraiser. You are not the appraiser. You don't play that role. You are not the valuation role. You are the valuation or the appraisal management role, or the valuation management role. So they say, well, what do I do when the appraiser doesn't know how to handle a certain situation? And so I sort of guide them. And generally what I say is, well, you might sort of give them an idea of what you've seen, but tell them that they need to you know, really determine what the appropriate scope of work and what the necessary steps are. You can't step into that role for them. And really, then you really need to be thinking about a competency issue, right? And this isn't to target appraisers or anything. This really is, honestly, if they don't know how to handle a manufactured house, then they might not be competent on that particular property type at this moment in time. And maybe they will be later, right? But the opposite is also true, right? When an AMC or another appraisal department sends a message or starts talking to the appraiser and it's clear they have no idea what they're talking about, it's really not the appraiser's role to correct them. We shouldn't be putting either side in that position. And so that's why we have this type of training. That's why we make sure that we have escalation. So when I'm looking at policies and procedures with AMCs, we're making sure that certain events trigger escalation.
Yeah.
So that you do have that chief appraiser looking, you do have a review appraiser looking from the initial screener, right? So now you have 2 sets or 3 sets of eyes looking at it, and it's handled appropriately instead of lacking what I always call translation, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps it's a revision request and it comes in and it's really bad, and we should never forward it to the appraiser. It's inappropriate. There's some good things, there's some legitimate things, great. Let's filter those through and let's figure out how we can ask these questions compliantly without requiring inappropriate action from the appraiser. One of the ways that I really like to illustrate some of the disconnect that occurs is the term assignment. Right? Okay. The term new assignment. Because really, and I teach this in my USPEP classes all the time, we talk about when is it a new assignment? When is it a new assignment? And then my next question, which isn't on the slides, is always, and who cares about this? Because truly, the client wants a report that meets their needs. Sure. Right? And I don't mean value needs, I just mean their regulatory needs. They don't care whether the appraiser is necessarily calling it a new assignment or not, but the appraiser must. So the AMC might care, the lender might care, because they're going to get a disclosure of previous service and things like that. But that's why it's incredibly important to the appraiser. The appraiser has obligations related to the work file, related to previous services and things like that. So when we hear the term new assignment, it doesn't mean a full new turn time or necessarily a full fee and things like that. We need to understand what the other person means when we're using certain terms. Right. And so that's just a communication problem most of the time. And so I really work to have AMCs and appraisal departments know how to speak USPAP. Wow. Right? Here's some key terms. Here's what appraisers mean when they say these things, and we don't have this disconnect of panicking saying, oh, this appraiser saying it's going to take 3 more weeks. No, that's not what they said. They just were simply telling you that they must consider it a new assignment because an element changed, and then downstream they may have to do a little bit of work, but it may be a very quick new assignment. Yeah. It might be a little lengthier depending on the circumstances. So anyway, we see those communication problems, and so from a very practical standpoint, I really like the training, and I've gotten really good feedback from it and work to improve and make those areas more robust to sort of take the time that I have with them to make sure they know how to speak to appraisers.
Love it. We're speaking with Josh Wallit. He's the principal consultant at Wallit Solutions. When we get back, Josh, I want to talk a little bit about bias. Actually, I want to touch on the third rail, if you will, and independence specifically, and some other items that might come to mind. I want to pause here, of course, to remind you that we are sponsored by 3 great companies. Of course, Alamode. Alamode software is the software that I've been using for over 25 years. And I'll tell you, just recently, I did a webinar with Jim Stafford, and you can find this on my website. Unlocking some of the tools within Total that even after 25 years, folks, I did not realize were there. Now, maybe I knew they were there, but I didn't really think that they were as easy to use as Jim laid out for us. And I'll tell you, it's amazing. Some of the things that can be done to save you time, hundreds of hours per year. I'm not joking on that. Hundreds of hours per year when you unlock the tools that are inside Total. Check them out. Go to alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE. Speaking of saving time, of course, DataMaster, been a sponsor on this program from the very beginning. And they are saving about 30 to 45 minutes on every report that we do within Appraisal Precision, at least the ones that we can do. Unfortunately, it's not in every single MLS area that we cover, but in the ones that we can, we absolutely love this great solution. It's DataMaster, folks. You can find out more at datamasterusa.com. One more time, it's datamasterusa.com. And finally, we're sponsored by OREP Insurance. Folks, I had an opportunity to interact with OREP just recently. Just a question that I had, and I'll tell you, the response was immediate. It was thorough. Speaking today with Josh about regulations and understanding, those people over there get it. They deal with appraisers all day long for years and years and years. They've been in your corner. They're an advocate for appraisers, and they're an advocate that you need on your team. Check them out. Go to orep.org. That's OREP.org. All right, folks, welcome back. We're speaking with my good friend, Josh Wallit, and we're talking about training. Specifically, Josh has been doing some training, putting together training modules for AMCs and lenders centered around regulation, some of the things we've been talking about. First of all, welcome back to the program, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really good to have you here. Some of the things we've been talking about before the break were, communication and understanding and USPAP and all of these things, and the frustration that appraisers sometimes have with questions that come across, and we think, really, is that even okay to ask, right? Or we find ourselves sometimes, quote unquote, educating the other side and saying, well, I understand, and we're trying to maintain good business relationships and not speak down to, but that's an interesting question. Maybe we could approach it from a different angle, right? Maybe this is now a new assignment, for example, and then all of a sudden they freak out. What do you mean a new assignment? We got to start over? Well, not necessarily. We just need to, as appraisers, consider it a new assignment. I want to talk a little bit about the third rail, if you will, and it's an issue that has come up and is rearing its ugly head, if you will, more and more. Discrimination, bias. Appraisers, of course, Josh, are to be the unbiased third party in that transaction, right? We should not have any bias toward any side. If in a purchase transaction, it shouldn't be toward the buyer, it shouldn't be toward the seller, shouldn't be toward the lender. In a refinance transaction, it should not be toward the homeowner, should be not toward the lender. We are supposed to report the value as it shows in the the geography that we're appraising in. Let's talk about this for just a second. What kind of training is being done on the lender side regarding discrimination, regarding bias, and some of the things that we've seen in the news lately?
Well, I know that lenders are providing this type of training, and they have provided this training in past years. I know it's occurring because when I go to lenders and talk to them about this, their staff does have a general idea regarding what's called UDAAP. Which are abuses, deception, and unfair practices and acts. ECOA, ECOA, which is the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and Fair Housing. They have familiarity, and the training that I do for them also gives them familiarity about what are these. So it is occurring out there. I think what the key is, and what AMCs and lenders alike are really eager to understand is, well, how can we see it? How can we find it? How can we uncover it if it exists, right? We don't want to be finding things that aren't there, but we do want to find it if it is there. And certainly in any profession, you're going to get bad apples. There are going to be circumstances where there are appraisers that have done something wrong. But for the most part, I don't believe that there's most people out there saying that every appraiser is doing something wrong. And I think that's where some of the frustration is coming from some appraisers. They're saying, well, I'm not discriminatory, right? I'm not, I'm not racist, or I have nothing against any religion or something like this. And we just have to understand that sometimes the bad apples are what cause regulations, and we all have to then behave certain ways and react certain ways because of the bad players. And we have bad players, and we want to make sure we're managing those bad players out of a profession. And so one of the first things I tell lenders and AMCs is, if you have a suspicion of it, if there's something reported or you see evidence, then this is one of those 2 or 3 sets of eyes, right? This is something that gets escalated. It's not, it's not the screener that's just automatically sending something into the state, but this is where you are going to go to the state regulator and say, look, we have this evidence here, not, we have some wild suspicion or some wild accusation necessarily, right? We have some evidence here. This is what we know. Take a look at this, and it goes to the regulator or to the attorney general, whichever is most appropriate in that state. So, and this is not about trying to trap appraisers or catch appraisers in when they haven't done anything, right? So I'm not trying to say that we should be reporting appraisers when there's nothing there. But one of the things that I really get asked a lot is, well, how do I know if there's something wrong there, right? How do I know if there's something that I should even be suspicious about? And it's a tough question. And we're going to have more examples, I think, as state regulators and attorney general start taking a look at real cases. And we're going to see more specifics about what it looks like and what sort of effects it has, right? What are they trying to accomplish and how are they accomplishing it? But the keys that I try to give is that we can be very forthcoming in our appraisal reports in how did I make my decisions, right? If we aren't explaining in our appraisal reports, and I'm talking about summary appraisal reports, the 22A, the old summary style, if we're not being forthcoming with how we searched for comps, or how we estimated these adjustments, or what we mean by a certain subjective word like good or average, or even our C codes and our Q codes that we're using, if we're not providing explanation for how we came to that conclusion, then what we do is we leave the door open for people to imagine what went on, right? And when something is a result, like a value that people don't like, maybe there was some friction that occurred on the visit. And now they think, you know what, I think it's because of I live in a certain area that's made up of a certain religion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or it's because of my skin color. And I'm by no means minimizing the real discrimination that occurs. But what I'm saying is when we don't make our process transparent within our reports, that's the point. It's not transparent, right? Mm-hmm. So if I say, you know, I've used the best comps, well, that's wonderful. As a matter of fact, it's pre-printed on your form already. You don't even need to say that. That doesn't tell me anything, right? And a summary appraisal report or the appraisal report with summary level detail should tell me something, right? It should tell me, why did I go to that subdivision, you know, 2 miles away? What about the subdivision next to it? Why didn't I go to that one?
Yeah,
right? I should have factual data. I should have market data. I should have data to back it up, right? Because we're going to be hammered based on the word opinion, right? Outsiders don't understand. The public doesn't understand what we mean by opinion. We don't mean a subjective opinion. We mean an objective opinion, meaning it's our interpretation of real data.
Right.
Right. We have evidence, we have logic. So that's what we're running into. I've met with a lot of appraisers who are frustrated about the edit or proposed edit to Advisory Opinion 16 in the USPAP book. But really, it's nothing new. It's just elaborating. Okay, this is not a surprise to us, these things. When we take a look at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I keep that in the training. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae have some really good information in their selling guides. And it talks about the use of subjective words, right? Like pride of ownership. Well, that's wonderful, but that tells me nothing, right? Dustin, what you think of pride of ownership might be different than what I think of as pride of ownership, and that's different than what Julie and Peter and Alan and you know, Jessica think. All these people, we all have different interpretations. So, do you mean that they have manicured lawns? Do you mean that they have, you know, sidewalks?
Yeah, right.
Do you mean that they have? And so that's what we mean, because otherwise, and this was sort of an aha moment for the training I last did with some staff. We use those as code words, or we don't use those as code words, but some people use those. Yes, they use those. They say, well, you know, pride of ownership, or, you know, high end and things, and that's a code word for getting away with things. And that's how people who are perpetuating discrimination in valuation, whether it's in appraisal, whether it's in evaluations by bank staff, whether it's anything else, that's sort of how you get around it. You keep it vague. You don't you know, provide details on how you came to those conclusions, how you made those decisions. Why did you turn left instead of right in your process? We want facts. We want data as a basis for that. But it goes beyond. And I realize I'm answering a question longer than you asked.
No, this is you're answering not just the question, but the 3 follow-up questions that I was going to.
There's really a lot to this. A lot to this, and we really, you know, in this time constraint, we probably can't cover it all. But you know, there's other issues that relate to appraisers, appraisal departments, and think about coverage area, right? Why does no one cover that county? Why do a lot of appraisers cover that county, but not that certain area of the county, right? Are AMCs and lenders providing enough resources in every area? And I don't mean the same resources, because if you do less business in one area, certainly you're not going to have as many screeners needed for that area. But do you have equitable resources there so that you don't end up with, oh, we're not really paying attention to turn times over here. We're not really paying attention to whether they get into visit the house on time. We're not really, okay, now do we have unintentional discrimination? Because we're not talking about only intentional discrimination. We're talking about unintentional. They may have a really great policy that, you know, one example I give, and that doesn't really relate to appraisals necessarily, but one is, you know, do they only give home equity loans in the amount of, you know, $75,000 or more? Well, that's a wonderful policy for a bank to have, but the impact could be discriminatory in an unintentional way, even though that's a policy across their footprint. Because think about, if homes are selling for $100,000, no one's getting a $75,000 home equity loan, right? They're getting a mortgage for, you know, $75,000 or more, right? So now we have an unintentional impact. Now that's not necessarily related to the appraisal, but what we can take a look at is we can't simply have blanket policies at AMCs and at lenders in their appraisal departments, because there can be unintended consequences when those are carried out, because areas are different.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you know, one of the things I just want to punctuate, because I think it was so key. You know, I've been asked the question, how do we? Because Dustin, I'm not racial. I'm not biased against religion or a certain area or, you know, a sexual orientation. That's not me. But I'm afraid I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to be pinpointed. I'm going to be pigeonholed as being that person. How can I avoid that? One of the things I heard you say, Josh, I just want to make sure it's emphasized, is tell the story. Don't just give your opinion, but if you've got support for that opinion and it's solid, that's going to be your best defense.
Yeah. Have data, have a basis for your decisions, right? It can't be, oh, my 25 years of experience. Your 25 years of experience is wonderful, right? I mean, that's great. But what about your experience? It goes to adjustments. It goes to, I mean, we use the experience line all the time, but okay, what about the data tells you the adjustment should be this much? What about the data tells me you should use this subdivision as an alternative for comps because you don't have enough sales in the subject set, right? What is the data you have? And that's really what we're looking at. And if we were to hold two reports next to each other, do we only see boilerplate, or do we actually see custom language that is appropriate for the process you truly followed in those assignments?
Yeah. Josh Wallit, thank you, my friend. How do people get a hold of you if they want to employ you for your services or have a question?
Yeah, they can email me. Emailing me is the best way to do it. Joshua@wallit.com. So that's JOSHUA at WALITT, like TomTom.com. And they can go to wallit.com as well to take a look at training we offer and other information. So, but yeah, email, and I believe there's also a phone number online. They can give me a call if they want to pick up the phone.
Awesome. My friend, thank you. Man, this has just been a wealth of information. Great information for appraisers. I just appreciate your time, my friend.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
We'll catch you next time.
All right. Take care, Dustin.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
He holds an SRA, an AIRRS designation with the Appraisal Institute, as a member of the National Association of He's a member of the National Association of Appraisers, holds a